The Kremlin has already made a fundamental decision to carry out a large-scale mobilization after the State Duma elections in September. Andrei Gurulev, a deputy of the State Duma of the Russian Federation and a former member of the Defense and Security Committee, has officially stated that a new mobilization will be announced in Russia this fall. Because of the difficult situation on the Ukrainian front, the failure of the winter-spring offensive, and heavy losses. At the same time, a number of European officials believe that the Kremlin may indeed be forced to resort to a second compulsory mobilization in the coming months if the high losses on the Ukrainian front continue. And right away, the Washington Institute for the Study of War points out that for the second month in a row, Russia has been losing control over territories in Ukraine. Moreover, while in April the net losses of previously captured territories amounted to 116 square kilometers by the end of May, this figure had reached 281 square kilometers. In other words, the trend for Russia is simply alarming, which is why Vladimir Putin is rushing either to force Ukraine to surrender with missile attacks or to announce mobilization, but only after the elections in September. So, let's figure this out. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the episode, and leave any comment under this video. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, it has been officially acknowledged in Moscow that a new mobilization will be announced in Russia this fall due to the difficult situation on the Ukrainian front, the failure of the winter-spring offensive, and heavy losses. This statement was made by a deputy of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, Andrei Gurulev, who was formerly a member of the Defense and Security Committee. Next, I will quote him from his Telegram channel. Right now, there are active discussions behind the scenes and in high-level offices about the need for a new large-scale mobilization. Moreover, people in the know say that a fundamental decision on this matter has already been made and the mobilization will take place in the fall. According to Gurulev, however, such a decision will not lead to a breakthrough unless the problem with drones is solved. The Ukrainian armed forces, which, as he says, are taking out infantry on the approaches, not allowing assault groups to lift their heads, and have literally saturated both the front line and the immediate rear. And, as he says, Russia will simply suffer a multiple increase in casualties. Gurulev also draws attention to the situation in Crimea, where there is a gasoline shortage and drone attacks on the highway that Russians call Novorossiya, which is supposed to supply the peninsula by land. I'll now share another quote from Gurulev. The enemy is acting brazenly, trying to cut off the peninsula, Crimea, and our southern groups from fuel supplies. The advance on the front has essentially stalled, and the special military operation has finally turned into a brutal positional deadlock, which is a harbinger of exhaustion if the initiative is not seized in time. Stop fooling yourself into thinking we'll break through soon. That won't happen until we radically change our approach. We must restructure our management and, most importantly, hold those who failed to ensure the security of the Novorossiya route strictly accountable so that no one else would even think of being careless in such matters. And I'll also note here that earlier, the London International Institute for Strategic Studies wrote about a possible new mobilization in Russia, in a report titled "The Upcoming Crisis in Russia's Political Economy." The Institute pointed out that the current possibilities for financing combat operations and replenishing the group fighting in Ukraine are close to being exhausted, and the Kremlin faces a fundamental choice: either reduce its military ambitions or sharply increase its demands on the economy and Russian society. According to the Institute, the second scenario may include a new mobilization, total border closures, restrictions on labor freedom, and the directive assignment of people to defense enterprises, and a transition to a fully militarized economy, which will combine state ownership and state control over prices. Well, I never thought I'd say this, but Gurulev is right. As the Institute for the Study of War writes, for the second month in a row, Russia has been losing control over territories in Ukraine, meaning it is losing more territory than it is capturing. And the trend for the Russians is simply catastrophic. If in April the net losses of previously captured territories by the armed forces of the Russian Federation amounted to 116 square kilometers, then by the end of May, this figure reached 281 square kilometers. Once again, in April they lost 116, in May 281. Well, if this situation and trend continue, you can calculate how much they might lose in June. That is, Ukrainian forces have largely stopped the Russian spring-summer offensive by now, from December 2025 to May 2026. According to estimates by the Institute for the Study of War, Russian forces have advanced only 40 square kilometers in Ukraine, whereas during the same period in 2024-2025, the rate of advance was 500 square kilometers. Thus, in 2026, Russian troops captured or penetrated only about 8% of the territory they occupied in 2025. The slow advance of Russian troops is due to significant changes on the battlefield, including ground counterattacks by the armed forces of Ukraine, intensified Ukrainian medium-range strikes, and the blocking of terminals. Starlink for the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and the Kremlin's restriction of telegram operations at the front. The reduction of territory under Russian control is being recorded for the first time since 2023, when the armed forces of Ukraine launched a counteroffensive. In the past 2 months, Russian forces have lost almost all the land they captured since the beginning of this year. But it seems that Deputy Gurulev let it slip, because after that this very Gurulev apparently sobered up. Well, like any Russian who, drinks vodka every day. And now Russians will rush to the comments to write, "What kind of stereotypes are these? We don't drink vodka. You drink vodka, you wear Bast shoes, and you're just wild, savage creatures." So, sorry, I got distracted. Gurulev explained the post about the severe deadlock on the Ukrainian front and the upcoming mobilization by saying his Telegram account was hacked, the mobilization of Russians in the fall. In his channel, now in the Max Messenger, Deputy Gurulev wrote that the texts on his Telegram account are being spread by enemies and called what happened a provocation. So, he doesn't say that he didn't write it. He says, listen, that post on Telegram, I was hacked. Now, basically, everyone is pushing this post and everyone is saying, look, Gurulev said this. And in this situation, a number of European officials also believe that the Kremlin may be forced to carry out a second forced mobilization in the coming months if the high losses on the Ukrainian front continue, and they will continue. According to sources for the Washington Post, in Europe, the possible mobilization is expected to take place after the State Duma elections scheduled for September. However, not everyone shares this point of view. Other European officials believe that the Kremlin is more likely to put the military campaign on pause than to take a politically risky step. Now, I'll quote the Washington Post. The 2022 mobilization caused Vladimir Putin's approval ratings and public support for the war to drop, and also led to hundreds of thousands of Russians fleeing abroad. Russia may take a pause because maintaining the war in its current form is becoming impossible. The Kremlin faces a fundamental choice: either reduce its military ambitions or radically increase demands on society and the economy. But in any situation, Russia will no longer achieve the victory that those wild, unwashed Russians dreamed of so much. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.